Sylvia, and he wrote that he and his I just because
Yeah, let's start. So, welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome people online. If there are people online, welcome as well. So this is the third session of 4 of Mindfulness and Buddhism in Everyday Life. And we'll be integrating some more practice with sitting meditation this evening. And I have things prepared to talk about again. I can tell you what let me recap some things from last time, just briefly, so I can bring us segue into where we're at and tell you what I was planning for this evening. And we're really, the benefit of a small group is it can be a discussion much more than a presentation. So if there's things that you're interested in hearing me talk about, I'm certainly open to talking about them if I feel like I have something of value to say. And if I don't have something of value to say, I hope I will realize that in the moment and say that, as opposed to try to answer the question anyway, which is often what people do, what I do. In terms of the recap, I think the pieces that are relevant as we move on is that closer, just given the size of the group, but however you're comfortable.
Well, I'll sit up here.
Okay. Nice to see you again.
And then there's the problem with the sight line of the camera. They may come rushing out.
Yes, and change it.
Can you see the camera?
I can see the camera,
Yeah,
but I was
we're all
able
set.
to see the camera before, but here's David anyway.
You guys,
So,
the 2 new people,
Yeah,
guys,
you
go
should.
this way. There's a microphone.
just one seat over.
And do one more.
Smart. I want to go over here.
Yeah.
It's okay?
Yeah.
I think you were okay where you were, Ben. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good for everybody's sight line.
Now they start to roll out.
Yeah. Okay. So the oldest form of Buddhism is Theravadan Buddhism. That's the Buddhism that uses the oldest texts, the canon, most likely closest to what the Buddha himself taught. Hello, nice to see you again.
I'm going to get rid of those chairs. So this has just been endless because of the sight lines of the camera. So.
Welcome. Yeah. And that's the Buddhism that is still practiced in Thailand and Myanmar, Sri Lanka. Those are the primary places. Mahayana Buddhism is the Buddhism that encompasses many, many different styles of Buddhism. Zen Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, these would all be considered Mahayana Buddhism. This developed starting maybe 500-600 years after the birth of the time of the Buddha, which we don't know exactly when it was. And much of the iconography from Buddhism and much of the Buddhist images that come to mind would be considered Mahayana, from the Mahayana tradition. The Tibetan art, the Zen art, this is all Mahayana, the great turning of the wheel. And that takes some concepts that were implicit in Buddhism and really magnify those concepts, and other concepts that started out as salient became less important. And then sometimes there's considered a third major school, which is Vajrayana Buddhism, and that's the Buddhism that's particularly practiced in Tibet. It's sometimes called Tantric Buddhism. It involves complex imagery and mandalas and mantra, use of sound to evoke different states of mind. And as Buddhism developed and grew, it was and continues to be, I think, remarkably adaptive to fit into whatever is going on in the culture at the time. So it takes into account other philosophical and spiritual traditions, rituals that are happening at the time. I think the way that we see this now with Buddhism's real proliferation in the West is that it's got a very psychological focus. And the West, in probably since the mid 20th century on, maybe earlier, I don't know exactly when, but we're a psychological culture. We value psychological explanations for why things happen, for why we are the way we are. We're such a psychological culture that we just take it for granted. We don't even usually think of ourselves as a psychological culture. Sometimes we can think of ourselves as an unpsychologically adept culture, but in fact we look at psychological explanations for human behavior. And so in much of how Buddhism is taking root and away with it, all the Buddhist lineages involve practices that are meant to cultivate both what I will just for shorthand call now a wisdom factor, a way of understanding and seeing the world, a template for what reality really is or might be or is not. At least Buddhism says less about what it is and more about what it is not. Because by the nature of ultimate realities, words will only go so far. So it's all still just finger pointing at the moon, as well as a cultivation of the heart and a cultivation of how to be in this world, no matter what this world is, how to cultivate compassion, how to cultivate kindness. Almost all or all Buddhist traditions that I know of would also value the innate goodness of the human being, that humans are innately good, and we can sometimes be thrown off course with that because of the presence of taints, poisons, which I will talk about. Some were the defilements. I mentioned this the last time as well: greed, hatred, and delusion. If there's time and openness, I have more to say about that today. And Buddhism, no matter what its flavor, also, again, almost always, not always, but almost always involves a contemplative, meditative approach to quieting the mind and stepping outside of the usual hubbub of daily activity, so we have an opportunity to experience things differently and ideally to see things as they really are, or closer to as they really are, that we can see through some of the common delusions that we live with all the time. What I'd like, I sometimes, maybe I do, maybe I don't know. And then what I would like to talk about today are the core concepts of Buddhism, at least the core concepts of Theravadan Buddhism. That would be the Eightfold Noble Path. The Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Noble Path, the role of suffering, the poisons, the toxins, the marks of all existence that I also mentioned last time, and then see where we're at from there. I will try not to go till 8:29. I will intentionally try to stop earlier. I wrote things out in advance. I tried to get a little okay, right. I forgot to have it. Yeah. So sitting practice again. Is everyone here familiar with a sitting practice? Yes, to some degree.
It's nice to review.
Sure, okay. So in the way that it's practiced in this lineage, it's just mindfulness practice. So there's no visualization, there's no mantra, there's no chanting, there's no... It's in essence stripping everything away to try to simply allow to train our consciousness, to train our mind to be here and now with the raw data, the raw sensory data of whatever arises. We're not theoretically paying more attention to any one thing than anything else. We're not seeking a solution. We're not moving towards a destination. We're just practicing being here now with whatever arises. And in that practice, we might have access of seeing how incredibly quickly, almost as if they're simultaneous, most of the time, we have a thought and we have a cascade of thoughts or reactions to that thought right away. We have a thought, and right away there's either, oh right, and this and this and this and this. There's associations to it that are mental associations. There's emotional associations. There's desire or aversion that kicks up. Oh right, oh ooh, ooh. There's self-judgments. There's self-aggrandizements. There's self-commentary. It rushes in so quickly that it can feel inseparable from the moment of the thought just by itself. So ideally, in sitting practice, what we're doing as we quiet the body, as we teach ourselves concentration by allowing ourselves to focus on the breath or focus on sensations that are, and so you can bring awareness to knowing that we are sitting. Now, we were sitting perfectly ordinarily fine before then, but the attention then is, oh, sitting. Right, there's a way that one can bring awareness to the pressure on the buttocks or the feet on the chair, on the floor, feel of clothing on the skin, feel of hands. We want to bring some degree of curiosity to that, some degree of, oh, notice this. Now, a caveat with that is the curiosity that we're looking to cultivate is not the curiosity of a psychological inquiry with thoughts. It's not like, why do I feel this way? Or what happened that I feel this way? It's just notice. And what does, if I have this, certainly emotions can be pleasant or unpleasant. If it's unpleasant, our habitual response is, I want to move away from this, or I want to contain this, or I want to resist this, or I want to gird myself against this, or I want to shed it. If it's a thought, if it's memory or a pleasant desire or a pleasant fantasy, it's like, oh, right, oh, yeah. Ooh, right, oh, that feels, oh, I want a little more of this. I want to cultivate this. I want to invite this in. And what we're trying to train ourselves in this practice is simply the noticing. Simply the noticing. I'd like to offer one or two more suggestions or guidelines as we enter into the style of practice, which is called choiceless awareness. And in choiceless awareness, you use the breath as an anchor, you use hearing as an anchor, or sitting as an anchor. I mentioned that I have tinnitus, which I know some people pronounce tinnitus. My ears ring. I'll just leave it as that. And I will sometimes use that as my anchor. It's actually a very effective anchor for me because I'm not making it happen. I don't get caught up in the doing of it. And it changes. Everything is always changing very subtly. So the ringing in my ears, which is for me more so in this ear than in this ear, and the frequency changes. I can use that as my anchor. Now with choiceless awareness, you're holding the anchor a little more lightly, and whatever arises, not trying to get lost in the narrative. In some ways the narrative is revolutionarily irrelevant. The content doesn't matter from one perspective. It's thinking. Thinking is happening. Not to get caught in the story, not to get caught in the history, the habit of it. Oh, thought. Hmm. Hmm. Thought fading, hearing. This I'm just narrating as if this would be the inner soft voice in choiceless awareness. It might be hearing, ringing. Sensations in chest is in the classic teachings. This paying attention to the breath, paying attention to the body, is called the first foundation of mindfulness. There's 4 foundations. The second foundation, which is also very tied to the body, is that whenever we recognize any sensation, any thought, any emotion, that it is immediately followed by what's called feeling tone. The Pali word is Vedana, and it doesn't translate exactly well. It's not feeling as in emotion. It's not, and it's not an evaluation as in good or bad. It's more like, it's more a simple recognition from everything that touches our field of awareness, that it's either pleasant or unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Now, noticing this can be, at first it can feel awkward, and it can feel irrelevant, and it can feel clunky. I wouldn't dismiss it so quickly, because what happens is, as one develops a meditation practice, if you start paying attention, you realize that very quickly after a thought, or a feeling, or sensation, we typically do register it's pleasant, or it's unpleasant, or it's neither pleasant nor unpleasant, and usually we just ignore it if it's neither pleasant or unpleasant. It's helpful to notice it, because sometimes it stops us from getting caught in the story. It stops us from running amok with the content of what's pleasant or the unpleasant. We recoil, we shield us. No. The pleasant we indulge, and we get lost from the moment. So sometimes it's helpful just to make a light mental note, pleasant. Just pleasant. Ah, right, this is pleasant, or this is unpleasant. And allow yourself to begin with awareness of the breath. And if you choose to expand that to choiceless awareness, it's all an experiment. Just see how that goes. if the mind wanders, if there is sleepiness or restlessness. None of this is a problem. The moment of seeing it is a possible moment of coming back to the here and now. Gently, persistently. Training our mental faculties to be here, now, with this moment of always changing phenomena. Keeping awareness in the body will keep the focus here and now. Awareness in the thoughts will very easily travel to past, future, imagination, far away. stay mindful in these. So I would just notice what's going on. The practice of meditation, and I may have mentioned this already, but the practice of meditation is not about sitting on the cushion itself. It's not about becoming a really good meditator. It's about gently and persistently working with our awareness, our mental capacities, how we usually take in information, to superimpose a way of being and experience, a way of relating to our own experience, internal and external. So it's the practice. Now it's the way that scales. For those of you who are musicians, practicing scales, practicing arpeggios, practicing whatever it is you would practice on your own particular instrument. It's not, the idea of that is to become, so you can play whatever music you want to play. It's not that it can't be beautiful in and of itself. It's not that there can't be joy and pleasure in the practice and in the scales. Meditating itself, if you start doing it for a while and it's not horrible, it can be really pleasant. It can be mind-altering, actually. Meditating can get you high. Meditating can lead to all kinds of very interesting and often very pleasant mind states. But the constant awareness to be working with, in some ways the constant tightrope to be walking, is it's not about becoming a better meditator. And it's not about feeling good in meditation. It's very hard to judge that was a good sit, that was a bad sit. Usually when we sit and we say, oh, that was a good sit, it was because I had some quiet, I was relaxed, I didn't fall asleep, I wasn't bothered by unpleasant, horrible thoughts, or if they came up, I was able to be with them in a gentle way. Whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, it's a real challenge. Is, can I stay pleasant? Can I stay present to the unpleasant and not get hooked by it? I think I might have mentioned that Joseph Goldstein, who is my teacher, he didn't tell me this story individually, he told it in a meditation setting, but his teacher Munindra, he said to Munindra once, I have a headache, and Munindra's answer was, oh, I hope you enjoy it. And at some level that's preposterous, and at some level it's, oh right, this is happening. This is happening. Can I not make it worse by clenching around it? Can I not make it worse by saying, oh, I hate headache, how long is this one going to last, and what if it doesn't go away and I have to deal with this again? Like, oh, this is a headache. Okay, let me just be with it as well as I can, with kindness and compassion, but without all the chazarai. That's not a Buddhist word. It's a modern Buddhist word. Chazarai is a Yiddish word meaning like junk and nonsense and all the stuff that adds on to it. Questions, curiosities, observations, anything, please, about the
I
sit.
have a question about the practice, and I've been thinking about it these past couple of weeks.
Wonderful.
And it's related to something that you brought up last time. And so in the practice of kindness and generosity and compassion, when you encounter someone's suffering, when you become aware of the suffering, so one's suffering, of course, but also the suffering of others, the boundaries, like, are there boundaries, and without taking on another's consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mhm.
what is the responsibility?
Mhm.
Because in my life, I feel I encounter that, and I'm never sure
Mhm.
what to do.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I don't know if the people at home can hear the question, so
Mhm.
can you quickly repeat it?
Sure. My understanding of the question is in getting in touch with a sense of compassion for the suffering of others, where are the boundaries, where are the limits? How does one actually live with that in the world without taking on other people's suffering, without having it be yours, and how to be of help in that situation? So the first thing that I want to say is it's a core philosophical and theological profound area of being human, so I don't want to give it a glib answer. So any answer that I'm offering right now is not the definitive answer for such a how do we live in a world where suffering is so there's so much of it, that there's such a large amount of it. So one of the thoughts that I have is it's easy to lose in that equation that there's also compassion for the self. Okay? So acting in a way that is meaning to take away suffering from others and causing suffering to oneself in the process is not, again, it's the paradox in some ways, and sometimes it is paradoxical, of cultivating wisdom. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It can be kind of a nihilistic, uninvolved, unengaged way of being in the world. And the compassion wing is, whatever this is, there's terrible suffering in it, and how do I live with that, and what do I do with that? So I think one of the possibilities offered on this path is the cultivation of wise compassion. What can I do personally? Sometimes there's action that one takes. One is oriented towards action or not oriented towards action. Sometimes action is helpful, sometimes it gets in the way. Sometimes action is not called for or is not possible. And so it's, how do I hold this in a caring way? One of the offerings that we're taught to offer people who are suffering is not necessarily may your sufferings end, because that may or may not happen, but may you be at ease with your suffering. Now, if it can end, that's wonderful. I mean, if there's a way for suffering to cease, of course, that's wonderful. But sometimes the meditation that we're holding is, may you be at ease with your suffering. May you carry your suffering in a way that is not all encompassing. May there be grace in your suffering. I don't know if there's a Buddhist concept of grace, but if there's not a word for it, there's certainly a field. Not in the field of Buddhism, but a book that was written, I read years ago, by a Lutheran minister. I can't remember her name. She wrote a book, and I really liked the title. Sometimes the title is like, you read a little of the book and you get the gist of it, and what she had to say was fine. But the title was The Rhythm of Compassion, or The Rhythms of Compassion. And she was somebody who was very oriented towards social justice work and going out in the world, and ran into the what might be considered ego problems that some people have in that regard. I cannot do enough. I keep on having to do. I feel compelled to do. I feel compelled to do. So what she came to is, there's a time of where the compassion goes compassion, and in some ways that only makes sense, because if we're giving and giving and giving, and we're depleting ourselves, then we're not going to be very effective givers. We're either going to be depleted givers, or resentful givers, or patronizing givers. So the idea of holding the field of compassion And at any given moment, there's a great concept in this lineage of Buddhism, which is skillful means. What is skillful in this moment? What is skillful in this situation? Now, it might be different in the same situation, moment to moment, day by day, relationship to relationship. So the practice, I think, is cultivating the mental space to at least clarify what is called for here, rather than rushing to action in a way that's not measured or not self-reflective. Does that offer anything that is in the realm of it?
It's helpful. Thank you.
I think I might have mentioned this also. But Byron Katie calls this what's God. Like, I'm feeling this and it's your fault, right? Or I'm feeling this, you have to fix me. You have to fix it. It's mine. It's mine. Each of us have things that are ours, that are not, that we might inflict for other people, and we might fantasize and wish for other people to fix, but it's not theirs. If it's mine to deal with. If it's not mine, if it's yours, I'm not going to pick it up. Why would I pick up what's yours to work on if it's not mine, if I'm being kind of seduced or pulled into something that is not mine? With human compassion and flexibility in there, of course. And then there are things that are what she calls, these are God. These belong to God. The overall question of human suffering, the overall question of human inequity, and the rampant unfairness of how lives are distributed and what we have. Major things. Whether they're God's or not, they're too big for any one of us to handle alone. And so it's not the discernment. The wisdom is what is mine and what is not mine to hold. What is not mine to hold. Or what is mine to hold in a loving, caring way. And I'm holding space for it, but there's a lot of suffering, maybe bottomless. Now, it's also the case, by the way, that if suffering is bottomless, loving kindness is bottomless also. That it's not a finite amount of loving kindness. And there's a great emphasis on the teachings that
Sleep. Get into bed and turn off the world, and whatever's going to come up. And it does it just the way you described. As a thought, then there's a rush of thoughts, then there's reaction, if any, to those, and then I fall asleep.
Right.
And when we were just doing the exercise now, I started down that path.
Yeah.
I said, no, wait a minute. I don't want to fall asleep. I want to sleep.
Right.
So what is the point at which I interfere, if that's the correct word, to prevent this from going down the leads to sleep path instead of leads to mindfulness path?
Yes. Right. So the first, I have, I think, two responses, if I can hold on to both of them. The first is just a reminder that sleepiness, lethargy, is one of what are considered the major hindrances. I spoke about the hindrances last time. So there's 5, the classic teaching is that there's 5 hindrances that get in the way of staying present and cultivating a mindfulness practice. Sleepiness or lethargy, the way that it was initially translated into English in the 19th century was sloth and torpor. And so that was the British way of, but sleepiness, lethargy, is one of the hindrances, and that's paired energetically with restlessness. We can also have a difficulty sitting and staying present, not because we're sleeping, but because we're either physically or mentally just all over the place. And those can sometimes happen together, sleepiness and lethargy. The other hindrances are desire and aversion, where we get pulled off being with what is because we're drawn by what we like and what we desire, or what we're repelled by, so we try to fend things off or invite things in. And the last hindrance is doubt. Doubt. I can't do this. This is not for me. I'll never get this. I don't believe in this. This is not a valuable path. Doubt can be pretty tricky. Doubt, because when doubt is so tricky. Doubt starts. Joseph once said to me, and this he said in an individual meeting, not. He said, doubt can masquerade as wisdom. It's real. Doubt is very good as camouflaging itself. So doubt can come in as skepticism or as intellectual. Yes, but. Oh, wait a second. This isn't. So anyway, your question was not about doubt, but it's a very potent hindrance. Well, we're as in this style of meditation practice, we're looking for a balance of relaxation and alertness. Okay, so the relaxation piece is wonderful, and the relaxation piece is what you're practicing at night to lie down, to go to sleep, and intentionally quieting the mind and intentionally bringing, softening energy in the body is a wonderful skill to have for sleeping and half for meditation. The other half that we're bringing to this practice is paying attention to the way the mind works, paying attention to how quickly we are unconsciously seduced into habitual reactions. Just they slide in usually below the radar. So if we can bring some effort in, if we can bring some alertness in, then we see it. So in that's the primary reason. One of the primary reasons why, I didn't say anything about it tonight, and I was kind of in my chair, and it's a Sunday night, but if you hold your body a little more erect, then there's the possibility of bringing more energy into the body, and sleepiness has less of a foothold. One can practice with eyes open, or opening the eyes if one gets sleepy, just to take in the added visual stimuli can counter sleepiness. Meditation is also there's standing. We practice meditation standing position. Meditation can be practiced sitting, standing, walking meditation. Maybe I'll teach walking meditation next time, because that's a really interesting practice. Or lying down. So lying down is a perfectly classically scriptural way to practice meditation. I think it's the most advanced way to practice meditation, because if I practice meditation lying down, it's also not going to last very long unless I'm really alert when I'm lying down. Otherwise, it gives into sleepiness. So this practice is continually a practice of balancing relaxing factors and energizing factors. That's true at the start of the path, and it's true as the path develops, where we're cultivating not only the quiet of the mind and the being with what is, but there's a process that's called investigation, for lack of a better word. That's somewhat of the curiosity that I was talking about, is we get curious about what's arising. We get curious about it in ways that, for example, an emotion will go away often if I don't poke it, or if I don't bring it in, or if I don't push it away. It turns out with almost everything that arises within us, there's very little that whoever you are, that the we have to do. Thoughts have a shelf life of seconds, microseconds, maybe, I can't remember. Thoughts, if you just look at a thought and don't hold on to it, it goes very, very quickly. You don't need to push it away. You don't need to do anything. We don't. That's investigation. That's curiosity. That's seeing the ephemeral nature of things that we tend to be as either solid or that we identify with as mine. So, and again, nobody owns the word meditation, and there's not an official manual about meditation. So many people use it as a way to relax. And the relaxation is a wonderful part of it. in this particular practice, the idea is to, and throughout Buddhism, it's to practice the relaxation, but also with alertness. A phrase that I came across this week that I had forgotten, I came across it in my own notes from a while ago, is diligent effortlessness. Diligent effortlessness. So we're looking not to put in, it's the balance of effort. We're not looking to be fully effortful, but there's diligence. There's diligence in how we're attending to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Other thoughts, questions, observations, curiosities? Answers? Okay, so I'm going to do 10 or 15 minutes on basics, and then we'll come back to questions and questions afterwards. So today we're working on the letter P and the letter F. So in Theravadan Buddhism, the oldest form of Buddhism, one of the central tenets is what's called the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths is what the story, as I've relayed it, is that the Buddha was practicing, born a prince, left the confines of the royal setting to go out to figure out how to understand the sufferings in life, and was meditating in the ways of those days, was mortification of the body and very austere practices, and then he gave that up, sitting under the middle way, and then had this night of insight. And the Four Noble Truths is the first teaching that he gave to his previous compadres in his spiritual practices. So he spoke this to all of them.
You're standing very close to some candles.
Oh, thank you. Talk about suffering. Oh, yes, that would have been lively. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Practice is to keep my mind clear.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. So this is central in Theravadan Buddhism. It's relevant to Mahayana Buddhism, but it's not as central. It turns out that they ended up, Mahayana practices go in different ways with it. And many of point. So the first statement is that there is dukkha. There is, it's most frequently translated as suffering, but it's in essence it's saying that life involves suffering. Now, as I've already mentioned, and is more accurate perhaps translations back to the Pali, is dukkha can mean an ultimate unsatisfactoriness. Nothing can deliver on its wished for, longed for promise of liberation or salvation or not being us. Not being us. I think we all carry a deep human wish that if I can find the right thing, then I don't have to be the aspects of me that I don't like anymore. That I can be healed, that I can be cured, that I can be the ideal that I can sometimes aspire to. Stress, discomfort, anguish, all of this. The first statement is simply that this exists. That this exists at every level of our being. And the second is that the cause of dukkha is clinging. So into modern ears, maybe this was true in ancient times also. This is like, okay, yeah, Buddha should be clinging to the way that my relationship should be, clinging to the way that my parents should have been. It's the clinging. It's the clinging to it. It's the clinging that causes the suffering. And that we are clinging at levels subtle, levels overt, and levels subtle, over and over. And it's the reduction of the clinging that leads to suffering. That leads to the reduction. It's the reduction of clinging that leads to the reduction of suffering. Dukkha, that's the third noble truth, is that dukkha eases with the relinquishment of suffering. There's a path to follow that leads to the end of suffering. So a few things about this. I'm going to stand here and just know that I will bring my mindfulness to the candles behind
You could
me.
blow them out.
No, I think we can manage all of it. If you can, are you okay?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, no, I'll see.
Thank you. I think I'm not going to step further back than this.
Yes.
And we're all
Then we're all set.
We're all good? Okay. So, in the way that they're initially presented, there's, and this is often overlooked, is each of these noble truths, and they're noble, by the way, in that they're ennobling for the human mind. It's not that this is for the nobility to practice, that they're considered noble in that this de facto, practicing these de facto brings out a nobility, an intrinsic nobility. The first one is to be understood. It's to be understood, it's to be really gotten that there is suffering, that dukkha exists, and that dukkha is a fundamental principle of our realm, that it is. Grokking, do you remember the word grokking was coined by Robert Heinlein, science fiction, Stranger in Strange Land. To grok something is like really to get it, to really know it. I think it's a very useful concept, really, like to understand it. And the cause of dukkha is clinging, and the practice here is clinging is to be abandoned. Not so easy, of course, not so easy, but that's the instruction with this one. That's the aim or the aspiration. As soon as you see clinging, you can, there's clinging, there's clinging. The content of the clinging is almost irrelevant. Joseph, again, I quote because he's so wonderful with words. Joseph has said, it doesn't matter what you are not clinging to. From one perspective, the content of your clinging is secondary, irrelevant. Again, taking the middle path with all of it, so I don't mean to be like to take this into absurd, but it's the clinging itself that is the source of the distress. That dukkha ceases with the relinquishment of clinging. That's to be realized. And a little less clear if the realized means like that, exactly how it's meant to be realized. Like if it's meant to be actualized, if it's meant to be experienced, I'm not sure about that. But it leads more that. But it leading to the cessation of dukkha is the Noble Eightfold Path, the way to live, to embody this over and over. So I think a few things that are relevant about this is, first of all, that it's not, the whole path is not just to be understood. It's not just a path of, I'm going to understand with it. It really is to be practiced and lived over and over. Not that there's not a moment of awakening where, I've got it, and I'm now, again, awakened, enlightened, perfected, cleansed of my human challenges and difficulties. It's practiced, it's abandoned, that it's happening over and over, and that it's not sequential, so that one can enter into the path at any time, in any way, and they're all feeding I think 17th century Korean teacher named Chinul. I don't know what his first name was, I only know him as Chinul. Maybe that was his first name and his full name. But what he said, I remember quite well, which I've read, which is wonderful, is his model of awakening was, of enlightenment was sudden awakening, gradual cultivation. Sudden awakening and gradual cultivation. So in Zen tradition, there were intense theological or philosophical debates, again, intellectual perhaps for the sake of intellectual, what is awakening? Is an accurate template. This is an accurate map to use, and having the intention or resolve to act on this. The intention or resolve, I think, is historically was becoming a monk or a nun. So most of the old Buddhist writings are not written for lay practitioners, they're written for monastic practitioners. Nonetheless, it's an intention to live the middle way. It's an intention to avoid the extremes. It's an intention to embrace harmlessness, not causing any harm, and refraining from ill will. The next three factors on the path all have to do with leading an ethical life and how we live virtuously. Wise or right speech, wise or right action and behavior and conduct, wise or right livelihood. They're pretty self-explanatory. Speech is quite interesting. So Shantideva, who was a Buddhist teacher, years later, maybe 8th century, might be, was before television. I think it was the 8th century. He made a list of the 10 things that cause suffering. 4 of them are related to speech. That the suffering that we bring into the world, 3 of them were related to action, 3 of them were related to correct view or the view that we hold, and 4 of them are related to speech. Speech is engaging in wise speech is a beautiful, challenging practice. Not lying, not slandering, not slandering, not speaking, not using words to harm, not engaging in gossip. For Pali, this sampapalapa is the Pali word for idle chatter. So wise speech is refraining from all of those. It's really hard not to talk about other people. It's really hard. We all do it to, I don't know, I make no assumptions. I would hazard a possible guess, maybe, that to some extent or other, maybe once, we talk about other people. It's a fascinating thing to do, to engage in a practice of not talking about other people, or at least as a step in that practice, when it comes up in your conversations, bring mindfulness to it. Bring mindfulness now. And it might actually, there was a while when I was really had higher aspirations than I do in my life, and I really adopted wise speech as a practice. And so when it would regularly come up in conversations with friends and with people that I cared about, because I was trying not to introduce it, so they would introduce the concept of talking about somebody else, not even with malice, not even necessarily maliciously. Sometimes it's just a little juicy. Sometimes it's just a little, and I would, if it was a setting that was where this would be received well enough, I would say, without judgment, I'm trying to practice wise speech, and can we look at a moment about what we're doing? Why are we talking about this other person? And if the conversations were non-defensive, and the conversations were shared conversations, it became really, really interesting. That often it was out of mutual concern. I'm glad that's not me. Or or if this brings you and me closer. That was a very interesting one. We're talking about somebody else because implicitly that means that we can talk about this other person. When I'm with that other person, I'm not going to be talking about, that the higher, subtle hierarchy of connection. Sometimes it's because I'm really struggling with somebody and I need help. I'm so affected by what this person said. So it felt like there were benevolent reasons to it, but just bringing a wisdom or bringing a mindfulness to what's going on when we talk about other people. The last three all have to do with mental cultivation, cultivating our own relationship with the practice. Wise effort, and that's internal. That's meant to be internal effort, not behavioral effort. Those are taken care of there. Wise developing mindfulness and developing a way of not being automatically lost in our reactivity, and wise or right concentration, also part of the meditation practice. So, it's really often likened to a medical diagnosis, which my understanding was, I don't know if this is accurate or not, is one of the ways that things were taught then. Here's the diagnosis, and here's the prognosis. The diagnosis is there's suffering. Here's the here's the etiology of the disease. It's clinging. And here's the cure, the prognosis and the treatment is the Eightfold Noble Path. And I think the last thing I want to say about this is the clinging is really one of the core, provocative, often counterintuitive, and nuanced, understood as desire is the enemy. Desire is the cause of suffering. And in fact, this is the teachings are very clear that desire in and of itself just is. Desire is arguably the deepest force in life. Everybody's sitting in the position that you're sitting right now because that's the position you desire to sit in. We are acting always based on desires, subtle and overt, over and over and over. So desire is just is. I think desire, I can't imagine existence without desire. It's when it turns into clinging or craving or grasping or pushing away or refusing. That's where the suffering comes in. Desires come, desires go. Desires will never be ultimately satisfied. That's dukkha. Desire just is. I have two more sheets that I'm not even going to turn over. If there, I will turn over one of them if there are no questions or comments. But let's go with questions or comments instead, if there are. Observations or reactions or.
I'm really interested in arhats, and I'm interested in those that have lived in the past and those that might be present with us now. I'm interested in people like Neem Karoli Baba, and who is this person on the plane? Who was this person on the plane with us? Are there other people here? Is it real? I don't know what to say because I'm a woman of science, but yet I've seen some pretty remarkable things within my spiritual exploration over time, and I'm not quite sure what to make of it. And I never had, for example, the privilege of being in Maharaj's context, actual sense. Although I've spoken to many people who were there,
Right.
for example. You got anything else to say about arhats?
Well,
in 2 minutes or less.
Yes. So the first thing I would say, just the definition of an arhat in Theravada Buddhism, an arhat is somebody who has who has seen the truth, and has awakened to move beyond the wheel of samsara, of wandering, who has seen the truth of the four noble truths and has abandoned clinging, and by abandoning clinging has then extinguished the toxins that poison us. Toxins being greed, hatred, and delusion. In other schools of Buddhism, there's concepts other than arhat for awakened beings. There's bodhisattvas, there's Buddhas, there's other awakened beings. And I don't think Neem Karoli Baba identified as Buddhist per se. I think his, I think he came, I don't know, I know who he was and who he, yeah, I know his, I know some about him. I think he came from the general Indian tradition of sages and saints, that people who are awakened through a yogic tradition or a Vedic tradition.
And certainly his students.
His students,
were-
yeah.
had
Ram Dass was one of
all
his
of them,
students, yeah. In terms of what it means to be a person of science and how to hold the concept of science might be, science hasn't reached there yet. That one day they might be considered scientific and understanding of various things. Otherwise, I'd hold the curiosity and the mystery with you of how to hold a Western worldview that is based in science, and science is a great tool in our kit toolbox, and other phenomena that we just don't know about. And if I haven't experienced it myself, or seen it myself, I don't know. So
I didn't experience Jesus, and I don't know,
right. Sam Harris, who wrote a wonderful book, I'm blanking on the name, several years ago, took Buddhism very seriously. I might have mentioned this early on, but what did he say? He said something like, he studied a lot of meditation, spent a lot of time in India, and he's a neuroscientist, and he's not a touchy-feely, soft, kind of mushy, new agey thinker. He's got a lot of rigor in his thinking. And at one point he says, has no interest in or no resonance with the concept of God. Now, telepathy, yes. Because he sees that as within the realm of neurological phenomena that we don't yet understand about how we communicate with one another. Certainly Neem Karoli Baba is one teacher was thought to be able to speak to you in a way that he could get a lot of more information than you were putting out. I was fascinated by that. Like, oh, right, there's... This is a really beautiful and forward-thinking and heart-centered part of the Buddhist path, which is the cultivation of loving kindness and compassion, sympathetic joy and equanimity. And then I would also like to talk about concepts of awakening. What does it mean to be enlightened, or what does it mean to be awakened on this path? And is that possible? And how is it possible? And what does it mean? And any other questions that you would have that you would want to address this next time. So, thank you for your attention once again. Nobody caught on fire tonight, which is always a good thing in a gathering. Yeah. And I'm available still if anybody has any questions and wants to.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. I often thought in English, we're lacking a word that means both. When somebody says thank you, we're lacking a word that simultaneously communicates thank you
Uh-huh.
and you're welcome. Like, there should be a concept that embraces both of those. Yeah.
Well, it's a good thing we scheduled 4 instead of 3, because there's lots more to go.
Absolutely.
Loving this board, yeah.
Oh,
We could always go to 6.